Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters, we have had so much fun trying out all of the features like Q&As and polls that let us be really creative and engage with our audience. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Hey, listeners, we're coming to you on our quote unquote off Wednesday to talk about The Crown season 5. So there is no special guest this episode. It's just the two of us, Jessica and I, dissecting season 5 of The Crown, which premiered on Netflix on November 9th. We hope we've given all of you enough time to watch all 10 episodes with no spoilers, and we're excited to dig in. So we're just going to discuss standout moments to us. We're not going to go moment by moment through the entire series. If you want to listen to the show's companion podcast, I have been listening to this and I highly recommend it. It's called literally The Crown, the official podcast, and they have great interviews with the cast and the crew and insight behind the scenes of the episode. So it goes without saying that if you don't want spoilers, maybe save this episode for later, but we've given you almost a full month. So I'm pretty sure that anybody listening to the show will have caught up on season 5 of The Crown. So let's dig into it, shall we?
Let's go.
All right. So we know that this season 5, covers the years 1991 to 1997. So, you know what? Right off the top, I'd love to know first your overall thoughts on the season. What did you think?
Well, I know we were all curious to see how this season would portray some of the notable modern day royals, myself included. I was, really just interested to see what it would be like to watch characters that, many of are still alive today, and that, all of them we've seen in real life on TV, at least. We've seen them speak, we've seen their mannerisms. So I was really curious about that. And I think a lot of people expected this season to be the most controversial so far, or perhaps even the most damaging.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, I thought it was okay. I will say it didn't have me glued to the TV where I couldn't miss the next episode, but I wasn't falling asleep during it either. So I found myself analyzing the characters and just trying to determine how accurate I thought they were and how they portrayed the royals in specific scenarios. We see scenes where there's just Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip behind closed doors talking, and I wonder, is that how they really were? So that was kind of the journey I was going on as I watched the season in full, was, just really thinking about these, when we saw some of the earlier seasons of The Crown, some of those people we didn't really see. Well, we didn't see in real time, speaking and or interacting with people. So the only thing we really knew of them was how they were portrayed by the Crown. These historical figures that go back before our time, a lot of times we only just see photos of them. So I think it's a little bit maybe harder to watch a character play someone who has been alive in modern times.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of my initial takeaway. That was kind of the journey I was on as I was watching it. And like I said, I wasn't, can't go to sleep, have to click to the next episode. But I wasn't bored through it either. Overall, I thought it was good. What about you?
Well, I was can't stop watching this, click through the next episode. So I think I made it, and not that it's like some kind of a race, but I think I made it to episode 8 in one day. And it was,
Wow.
yeah, I couldn't stop. And I was like, no, you need to break this up into 5 and 5. But, the thing about The Crown is obviously I love the British royal family, but I think I would love this show, The Crown, even if I was not a fan of the royal family. It is a beautifully written show, it is a beautifully acted show. It is a beautifully shot show, and I just like the show. And so the 90s were when, like, kind of my entree point into the royal family. I remember all of these things when they happened the first time. And
Hmm.
we're going to talk about this later, but there were even some things that season 5, there was so much drama in the 90s that there were things that were left on the cutting room floor that didn't even make the show. And so, I mean, I loved it. I don't know if I have a favorite season of The Crown. It's all good to me, but it definitely lived up to the hype for me. And you mentioned this, and I agree. I was expecting them to go really, really, really hard, and then it was going to be painful for Charles. And there were obviously points where it was, but honestly, I think that um, I thought they went too soft on him, honestly. And I don't think that it was tough enough. And we'll get into that later too. But I enjoyed it. I always enjoyed The Crown, though.
Well, going back to, the individual characters, there's been a lot of talk following this season coming out. Was Philip convincing? Was Charles convincing? Was Diana convincing? All of these different characters. And I think when it comes down to it, like I said, once you're portraying modern day royals, it's really difficult to play them in a movie or a show. And I think we expect the actors to practically be the real person. And of course, it's never going to happen, but we're often disappointed when they don't feel like the person that we've observed in real life. So I think we have to have realistic expectations when it comes to portraying these people. But I did think Diana was very convincing.
Oh, yeah.
Charles less so, and Philip, for me, there were times when I thought the actor worked for him, and then there were like certain scenes or certain camera angles that I thought it really didn't convince me, and I didn't think it was a great Philip. But I think Charles and Philip were both maybe better cast in previous seasons, but Diana, hands down, she did a great job.
Oh,
It was
nailed
very
it.
convincing.
Nailed it. Well, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, but I mean, just the voice. Elizabeth Debicki is Diana, the voice, the carriage,
Yeah, and
everything.
what?
Nailed
It's
it.
interesting. I actually was looking up Elizabeth Debicki. Do you know she's 6'3" in real life?
She's 6'3".
Yeah, so Diana was 5'10". So she was tall. And I think Kate is
Wow.
actually 5'9", but Elizabeth Debicki is 6'3".
That's amazing. Wow. That,
Yeah.
like, 6'3" flat-footed.
I mean, according to Wikipedia, she's six
Wow. That's
three. So
amazing. No, she was absolutely phenomenal.
so it seemed to me also, this was something that stuck out to me. Like, the Crown went out and hired a team to really go track down all of these big news headlines, gossip articles, standout moments related to the family from this period, and task them with incorporating them into this season. So, for me, it's like they used those reports and built them into their storyline, whether they worked or they didn't. And some of them kind of left me wondering, was it necessary to include that, or could we have changed it a little bit? Did we need to cover that? The backstory on Dodie felt a little irrelevant to me. The parts with Penny Natchbull, which, I don't know what your thoughts were with that. They kind of seemed a little unnecessary. And ultimately, I think this season really left me understanding why the palace may have wanted a disclaimer on these episodes, because I think, there were a few scenes that even I felt like I needed to research to see how close to reality the events actually were, and how much of it was fiction. So I think if you're someone who follows the royal family as close as you and I, if I have to go out and do that, surely the average American viewer may not know which scenes are, fact and fiction. So I don't know. It to me it felt like they wanted to go out there and pick all of these big headlines that happened during the 90s and make sure they somehow built that into their storyline. And that's kind of where we went off fact a little bit in some of
Yeah.
those situations.
Well, I think that we are keying up Dodie to be the Dodie Diana love story to be like one of the major storylines of season 6. And so I think season 5 kind of lays the groundwork for Dodie. And we're going to go through kind of briefly, but each of the episodes in a second. The Penny Natchbull thing, I think that felt to me like they were exacerbating that for Hollywood drama. I don't think that there was any there. That so we'll talk about this in a second with something out of episode 1, but the Crown research team is phenomenal. Like I mean, Andrew Morton is a character in episode 2, and he said he was also a consultant on the Crown, so he's probably like, he was involved in this, but he said that the research was so good, they got it down to the exact type of paper that he used in his typewriter to write Diana her true story. However, while I do believe that it is based in fact, it's still Hollywood, right? And so it's still got to be dramatized. I mean, we don't to your point earlier, we don't know what the Queen and Philip said to one another in that room on that day. I mean, no one would have been there to know that. So, it's creative licensing, but I truly do. I mean, we've had Robert Lacey on this show, who is the historical consultant for the Crown, and I truly do believe that it is mostly based in fact, with slight tweaks to make the story flow and to make it more interesting and dramatic. But the Dodie part, so we'll get there. But the Penny Natchbull part, I think that they were really trying to hint at, a flirtation at minimum, at maximum maybe something more inappropriate, but that was not the case. And so and then so this is about I think it was season 2 of The Crown, but I actually wrote an article that Prince Philip, when he was still alive, considered suing The Crown for one of the storylines, the storyline that said that his sister, Cecile, got on the plane, which ultimately crashed, and she died, to come see him, because he had gotten in trouble at school or something, and that bothered him so much. Of course it would. Like the show, again, to your point, if you don't know the backstory, and I don't even know that backstory, and I report on the royals for a living, and if you don't know that, then you're going to think that Cecile's death was Philip's fault, and that's not true. And so yeah, there, I mean, we have to take it with a grain of salt that it is still Hollywood.
So overall, what were your takeaways, Rachel?
Okay, so I have a few. So I'm going to start with episode 1. So the Britannia, which is the royal yacht, I think that was really used as, of course, a very obvious metaphor. They're thinking of decommissioning Britannia. Britannia means so much to Her Majesty because she wasn't around for the start of Windsor Castle or Buckingham Palace, but she was there to commission Britannia. That is hers and hers alone. And of course, the metaphor is that the yacht is old, and it's past its prime. It's time to retire it. And of course, the metaphor here is that the Queen may be as well. I mean, in this, she's only, I think, in her 60s in the 90s, and so she's certainly not that old. But we also, I have to ask you this question. So it's in episode 1. Still, we see Charles and Diana go on an Italian cruise with William and Harry. Did you notice in season 5 that William actually gets ample airtime? And fun fact, so Dominic West, who plays Charles, the the boy who plays Prince William is his actual son, like his biological son. I thought that was interesting. But William gets ample airtime in season 5. Harry, he has like one line in episode 1, and then there's a picture of him later, and that's it. And I found that interesting considering the Sussex's involvement with Netflix, and I wondered if you caught that as well.
Yeah, well, I did hear that that was Dominic West's son, and I thought that was interesting. But I also noticed that the Harry character only had the one line, and I found it interesting as well. And I thought about, the Sussex involvement with Netflix as I was watching this whole season, honestly. And it does feel weird that they're doing this Netflix series themselves almost alongside this one. So I don't know, if that was a coincidence or if there was an effort there to cut back the airtime for Harry. Did you
I
have
don't
thoughts
know.
on that?
Well, I just wonder if like there was like a part of the deal, like the part of the a part of the clause for when the Sussex is signed on with Netflix. That's, I mean,
Mhm.
of course, I have no knowledge of this, but there was like, I will not feature it as a main character in The Crown. I don't know. I noticed that. I found that very striking because William, he gets a lot of airtime.
Mhm.
Harry literally has one line, and so staying with episode 1 for a minute, I wrote an article about that headline in episode 1 from the Sunday Times, which bothered me because I can't imagine this being true, that the Queen should abdicate in favor of the Prince of Wales. So when you saw that headline, what did you think? Did you think that's impossible, that that's true?
Yeah. I mean, I would not think that that would be truth at all. I don't
Mhm.
know. Did you have what was your initial reaction?
Well, I was like, no way. I mean, in 1991, and
Yeah.
so here's what I found. So in the episode, the Queen's, if listeners, if you don't remember, the Queen's household staff desperately attempts to hide a copy of the Sunday Times from her. It contains a poll that says Charles was more popular among the British public than she was. So on the show, the front page of the newspaper, which is dated August 11th, 1991, reads, Queen should abdicate in favor of Prince of Wales. And it's followed by the subheading, half of British public agrees. So when I saw that, I was like, yeah, right, no way.
Mhm.
And so the Queen, who turned 65 in 1991, was described as irrelevant, old, expensive, kind of like Britannia, and out of touch. And in contrast, Charles was 43 most of 1991. His birthday is in mid November. He was called young and energetic and modern and empathetic. So here's the reality check. And I wrote an article about this for Marie Claire. So I did my research here. The poll was, first of all, not conducted by the Sunday Times at all. It was actually from MORI, or MORI, I'm not really sure, which stands for Market and Opinion Research International. And it showed that the public was largely pro monarchy. So the poll said, despite assaults by the tabloid press and a decade of intimate scrutiny, the royal family enters the 1990s as a remarkably popular part of British life, it reads. So the Queen Mother was Britain's favorite royal at the time. We had an episode on her a couple of episodes ago that you all loved, and love Gareth Russell. Then after the Queen Mother, followed by the Queen, then the Prince of Wales. So the Queen was actually more popular than her son. The article does include the statistic mentioned in The Crown, 47%, so nearly half of the British population supported the Queen stepping aside for Charles, but it was followed by the 3 critical words, at some stage, not the urgent call for change that it was made out to be on the show. So the poll was also published on January 21st, 1990, a full year and a half prior, when Margaret Thatcher and not John Major, which was portrayed in the show as the one Charles lobbies for his mother's early abdication, was prime minister. So just interesting side note, the only mention of the Queen in the actual August 11th, 1991 edition of the Sunday Times was to the undisputed Queen in an advertisement for a royal cruise liner. So this again is proof that while the Crown does have roots in fact, it takes fictional dramatic license as well. Like it really took major fictional dramatic license there. And the Queen, the episode 1 title is actually called Queen Victoria Syndrome. There is no such thing. It was actually, that is a term that was created by the Crown. So there is no such thing as Queen
Huh.
Victoria Syndrome. So stuff like that. Like that's why people want the disclaimer, and I understand that. So we mentioned this a minute ago, but I want to take a minute before we go into episode 2 and beyond to talk about, we'll just start with Elizabeth Debicki as Diana. So I thought she was phenomenal. I think she should win every Emmy there is. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, down to the mannerisms, just, I mean, her, her look, I mean, it was very, very, very convincing. I thought that was the most well cast person of this
Agree.
season.
So Dominic West as Charles.
Now, I do not think he was as convincing. I mean, I think it could have been worse. There were some times where I was kind of okay with it, but in most of the shots of him, I felt like Charles from the last season was much more convincing. What about you?
There's a headline in Vogue. I think Michelle Ruiz wrote this article. Dominic West is too freaking handsome to be Charles, to play Charles. He's too sexy. I'm sorry. It's not convincing to me. From the back, like the way he carries himself, maybe, but I couldn't get into it. Now I'm blinking. It's Josh Charles who played Charles last season. He nailed it.
Oh
Just
yeah.
that was my favorite Charles. Okay, what about Imelda Staunton as the queen?
So this goes back to like expecting the real person, like, I mean, did it really feel like the real person? Not really, but I was okay with the cast. I thought it was probably as good as they could have gotten, without it actually being Queen Elizabeth playing herself, I guess. I
Mhm.
was okay with it. What about you?
You know, it was okay. I mean, she's a very talented actress, obviously. And now this is bothering me because his name is not Josh Charles from season 4. I'm gonna and somebody's like, because Josh Charles is an actor, but that's not who it was. Hold on, I've got to figure this out. Um, oh my gosh, hold on. Josh O'Connor. There you go. Josh Charles is an actor, but not this actor. Josh O'Connor is who I meant from season 4. Okay, Imelda Staunton is an incredibly talented actress. This was not my favorite role for her. I will never there just won't be a better queen for me in The Crown than Claire Foy. That's just it. I mean,
Yeah.
Claire Foy was just so brilliant. But I mean, Imelda Staunton, of course, did a great job. But there was just, I don't know, there was just something missing for me there. Another, and the character of Prince Philip has had many great actors play him. Um, I loved Jonathan Pryce as Philip, and I was wondering what you thought.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I thought he did. I thought it was an okay casting. There were certain, I don't know, there were certain times where I would, maybe it was a camera angle or something, and I was like, that looks nothing like Prince Philip. Like I'm just like,
Mhm.
in just kind of the way he would talk, it wasn't convincing in every scene.
Mhm.
But again, like, I mean, I guess they could have done worse. I thought, as a whole, I was okay with it.
Mhm.
But gosh, I mean, nobody was cast as well as Diana
Yeah,
still.
it's not even it's
So
not even a
if that's what we're
competition.
comparing it to,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
hard.
yeah. She was perfect. So episode 2 dives into the Penny Natchbull situation. Andrew Morton. We've actually had Andrew Morton as a guest on the show. He remains. I will say this every time I talk about Andrew Morton, and I'm embarrassing myself when I do this, but his voice is just like butter to me. Oh my gosh, I'm just like I kind of have a crush on him. But Andrew Morton is a character in episode 2, of course, the writing of Diana, her true story, and you can see the involvement that she had in that book. Andrew Morton, as I said, was a consultant on the show, so you can expect that episode to be pretty accurate. And episode 3 might actually, this is surprising to me because I didn't understand its placement so soon in the season. Episode 3, I because obviously Muhammad Al Fayed is going to play in season 6 a lot, the summer of 1997, but episode 3 actually might be my favorite episode of the season. So we learn all about Muhammad Al Fayed, his obsession with the British, about an outsider becoming the insider. And then here comes, as you mentioned earlier, his son Dodie. Of course, he's going to play a major role later in the series and in the forthcoming season 6. I actually loved learning about Sidney Johnson, who was the valet to the Duke of Windsor and later Muhammad Al Fayed. And I really like how The Crown, and as a writer, there's just no better writing, I think, than on this show. And it takes us in directions we never thought we could love so much. And I again do wonder why this was the focus of episode 3 and not later, but I loved it. So I didn't know what you thought of episode 3.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see what you're saying there. And I think maybe there were some elements of this episode that were important maybe to somehow weave into this season, but I don't know. Like, I don't know. It felt a little bit like it went into a lot more detail than I think I was really wanting. And I think it was just not what I was expecting. I don't know. It's not what I was expecting to see in this season, and felt like maybe I don't want to say like totally irrelevant, but I felt like they went into a lot of detail that
They did
maybe we didn't need.
as The Crown is prone to do. So episode 4 has a ton packed into it. All 3 marriages. So the Queen and Prince Philip had 4 children. 3 of them were married in the early 90s. All of the Queen's children who were married at the time, so Charles and Diana, Andrew and Fergie, Anne and Mark Phillips, all of those marriages end. It's also the Queen's Annus Horribilis, 1992, with the marriages ending, plus the fire at Windsor Castle. And I want to point out maybe the most striking thing for me from episode 4 was the juxtaposition of Margaret and Peter Townsend, and their relationship was covered in detail in earlier seasons of the show, and how their situation was handled. Of course, Peter Townsend being a divorcee, compared with Princess Anne and Timothy Lawrence, who would become Anne's second husband, who she is still married to today. And then, of course, that through line with royals marrying divorcees or divorced royals remarrying carries through with Harry and Meghan, but that will never be covered because I think The Crown season 6 cuts off around 2002. So I just thought that was really interesting. And episode 5 sees that infamous, I hate talking about this so much, tampon gate, Camilla gate, whatever you want to call it, intercepted call between Charles and Camilla. Finally, Charles and Diana separate. Charles goes on Jonathan Dimbleby's program. We're just breezing through this, but and then of course Diana's revenge dress makes an appearance. So I think episode 5 is probably the most damaging to Charles, if there was one. I still think they went too soft, but do you think that this episode will impact his reign now?
You know, honestly, I don't really think so. I think if there was going to be damage, we would have already be hearing of it. And I don't feel like I've been hearing a lot of backlash
I
toward
agree.
Charles and Camilla. I think if honestly people had made such a big deal of it before the show aired, I don't even know if it would have gotten this much attention. But I feel it's like one of those things, this too shall pass. I don't think there will be a long-term impact. But this was an episode that I was interested in tuning into for sure.
Yeah, see, that's the thing, and we're going to talk about this in a second. The Crown has such a mixture of really juicy, like ripped straight from the headline stuff, like Camilla Gate. I hate calling it Tampon Gate. I won't do it. So Camilla Gate, and then also in episode 6, we go into like the execution of the Romanov family. It's like totally like a 180. But I wanted to say this last point about episode 5. The postscript of the episode, I swear to you, I have no factual evidence of this, but I swear to you that Harry, like after that episode, which again is probably the most damaging one about Charles, I swear to you that Harry was like, you got to add in this postscript though about what he's done with the Princess Foundation. And I found that to be very pro Charles, and I seriously feel like Harry made them add it. Also, okay, now you guys are going to see this and you're never going to be able to unsee it. But in the postscript of episode 5, you can go back and look at it. Maybe they fixed it by now because I watched it when the season first dropped, but the word fulfill, Fulfill, is misspelled. I'm like, come on,
Really?
yes. And I could not unsee it. And it bothered me because I'm like, it's The Crown. Like it's one of the best shows on TV. And you guys misspelled the word fulfill. So anyway, go back and check it out. Maybe they've changed it by now. I don't know. But episode 6 is really what I love about The Crown. It's more than just gossipy headlines. It's hard hitting. It's great writing. I found episode 6 to be a very cerebral episode. So, of course, we've got the execution of the Romanov family in that storyline, which is incredibly interesting to dig into for our history lovers. Penny Knatchbull plays a big role in this episode. The Queen and Philip's marriage feels distant. Philip admits he's lonely. He admits to a close friendship with Penny. The Queen meets Penny, worries about her marriage. Again, I think like I've heard a lot of headlines about how this season in particular would have devastated the Queen, and I think when I hear her friends say that, I think they're talking about this kind of stuff with Philip,
Mhm.
and just really alluding to the fact that at minimum he was having a flirtation with a young beautiful woman, and at maximum it was more than that. And hop in here if you have any thoughts. I'm just rolling on. But in
Well,
episode, go ahead.
when we talk about, the dramatization and the Hollywood of it all, do you feel like I think we both agree that they took the Penny Nashville thing too far
Yeah, I
for
do.
Hollywood, but do you feel like there was a point in their relationship where he did feel like sort of lonely, or maybe they did feel distant?
Oh, I'm
Um,
sure. I'm sure. I feel like every marriage has those years. I mean, I feel like who is it this? I think it was Michelle Obama in her memoir. She was like, and I'm gonna misquote this, so this is me paraphrasing, but it's like, if you have Philip and the Queen had a 73-year marriage. There's going to be bad years there. There's going to maybe even be like bad decades there with a marriage that long. Like that's marriage. I
well,
think every marriage feels that way, let alone to the Queen of England.
I go back to that. There's that quote, and I don't know who it's from, but it's sort of a famous quote where it's like, throughout your life, you have 3 or 4 really amazing relationships, and if you're lucky, they're all with the same person.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Yeah.
and I sort of think about that in relation to this extremely long marriage, and I say that in the best way, right? That's a blessing to have a marriage that long with another person. And look, she put the crown first in a lot, or the monarchy, whatever we want to call it, first in a lot of different ways throughout her life. And I'm sure there were periods where Philip needed an outlet, he needed, a hobby or something to do. And I think with Penny, my my feelings about this was the Queen, thought warmly of her and probably encouraged Prince Philip to spend some quality time with her. I don't think it was a romantic thing at all. I think that's
Mhm.
where the Crown took it too far, and I think the Queen was, supportive of that friendship.
Yeah, I think so too. But yeah, I mean, marriages can be lonely, even if you are madly in love with the person, it's just relationships are never perfect. And
Well,
it,
and I feel weird sort of putting my thought like I think this or I think that, because I mean, who am I to say that, I wasn't there, obviously, but
Mhm.
this is just coming from other things that I've read and other interviews that I've heard people give, and the way that I've heard people talk about this. And I mean, you've kind of gathered your thoughts based on similar sort of research, and I don't know. I mean,
Mhm.
that's um what I've sort of pieced together from what I've heard.
Yeah. Well, in episode 7, we see Diana post separation. We see the emergence of William as a character and her love story with heart surgeon Hasnat Khan, who many have said was the love of Diana's life. So this relationship really happened. He really was just a pretty nondescript heart surgeon, and they fell deeply in love. They dated, I believe, from 1995 to 1997. And by the way, the Apollo 13 reference took me right back to 1995. I love that movie. That's a great movie. But I'm just wondering what you thought of their romance.
It's interesting. You talk about how they had this great love, but his name is actually one that I feel like I don't always hear a lot about, or that, doesn't really come to the forefront when we talk about people from Diana's life. Like, we hear about Dodie and we hear about, oh, what is his name? James.
Gilby. Oh, James Hewitt.
Yeah, yeah. I hear all these other names. And so I don't I don't know that it would have stood out to me that he was, and maybe this is just my, I don't know, lack of knowledge on Diana's relationships prior to, in recent years when, we've started to have, I don't know, I've started to read more about it, but I don't know, his name just doesn't always come to the forefront of my mind. So I think it's an interesting relationship to
Well, and it was
highlight.
super under the radar, right? And that's how she wanted it. And we hear about Dodie, and of course we always will because they died together. They had that last
Right.
summer together that was so paparazzi filled. But I don't think that. I mean, what do I know? Like I sit here armchair quarterbacking, but like I don't think like I think that honest to be honest with you, and this is me kind of speaking out of turn, I think the Dodie relationship was to kind of get back at Hasnat Khan because they had just broken up. They had just broken up before Diana went off for the summer of 1997 and and what culminated in the end of her life. And so all of those press photos were for to make him jealous, Hasnat Khan jealous, honestly. And I truly think that and we'll touch on this in a minute. The Crown obviously goes deep into Charles and Camilla's affair, but doesn't really touch on Diana's affair. And she had quite a few. She had a handful of her own. And
Mhm.
but this was not an affair. They were divorced by or they were separated at least by then. And I truly think that this was the love of her life. So I thought the Hasnat Khan and the Martin Bashir Pakistan connection was interesting. And this episode was maybe one of the more controversial episodes of the season because it starts the storyline that continues into episode 8 about Diana's infamous 1995 bombshell interview with Panorama interview with Martin Bashir. So that we'll continue that through in episode 8. But I also wanted to bring up there was a scene in here that is probably based off of a letter that Diana wrote to someone about how she thought Charles was planning brake failure in her car. But there's a scene in episode 7 where she has brake failure. And I was just wondering what you thought of that scene. It was a very dramatic scene.
Yeah, well, this is one of those scenes where people might not know what's fact and what's fiction, because it is, like you said, a fact that Diana believed people had been tampering with her brakes, but this exact scene never happened in real life.
Mhm.
It was definitely written into the storyline for a dramatic effect. I mean, overall, I thought, watching it, like it was, acted well. I thought it was a good scene. But it it never, that specific scenario never actually happened. I think she had believed, I don't know if there was something that happened that prompted it. I think she had believed that someone had tampered with her brakes and then she had gotten a new car or something in real life. But yeah, what did you think of that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely did not happen in real life. It was that's the example of where Hollywood and the dramatization comes in. Like they like it's like the show takes a nugget of truth, like she really did write that in a letter, but then it turns it into a drama. And so you have to really watch this season and all seasons of the show with that kind of grain of salt. You have to realize that yes, there's a basis in truth, basis in fact, but it still has creative license to it. And episode 8 finds William not wanting to know about his mother's love life. I don't kind of blame him. He was only, a young teenager or preteen at the time. Episode 8 really does take us into the Panorama interview. So Diana calls Martin Bashir on his deception, but she goes ahead and goes through with it anyway. It's a meeting so secret, and who knows if this is true, that she did her own makeup. It just kind of shows that nothing new is under the sun. I mean, Harry and Meghan's Oprah sit down last year was controversial, but it's kind of all been done before in some form or fashion. And I just want to continually point out here that yes, the Panorama interview was incredibly controversial. It ultimately kickstarted the process that led to Charles and Diana's divorce, but it was Charles that hit first. He went on Jonathan Dimbleby first. So it was him
Right.
that struck first. So I just want to point that out. But then the Queen and Diana, and of course, who knows if this really happened, have a sit down. She tells Her Majesty about the Panorama interview. And then in episode 9, finally, Charles and Diana finalize their divorce. The Queen writes a letter, says it's time after the Panorama interview. I find this so interesting in episode 9 about Camilla hiring a spin doctor to help her rehabilitate her image. This just takes me back to how incredulous the idea of Camilla one day being queen was in the 1990s. So Katie Nichol, we had her on the show a few episodes ago. She talked about something called Operation Parker Bowles, and that is what is outlined here in episode 9. It's just unbelievable. Like, for those that remember the 90s and how vilified, I mean, Camilla could not even go to the grocery store without having tomatoes hurled at her, bread hurled, like people throwing things at her. They hated her so much. And I found it really interesting in episode 9 how I really love the writing in this show. Like I'm obsessed with the writing in this show and how I can't remember what number it was, couple 33 or couple 31. And this episode showed like vignettes of other couples that were divorcing. And then it just, at the end of the day, Charles and Diana were perhaps the most famous couple in the world. But at the end of the day in divorce court, they were just couple number 31. And I thought that was so interesting.
Well,
So
in the 90s, it was not uncommn for people to be getting a divorce. I mean, I feel like that was
mhm.
happening everywhere in the 90s. One thing I wanted to ask you, what were your thoughts on the Camilla character and how Camilla was portrayed?
Oh, I thought gosh, her first name is Olivia, and I'll look this up in a minute. I don't want to do her any disservice or disrespect, but I cannot. I think it's Olivia Williams. Oh, I thought she nailed the character. I loved this character. What did you think?
I agree. I thought she did a good job, but it made me really, going back again to like thinking about these people in real life, it made me wonder, how Camilla and Charles interacted behind closed doors because, she gives off this, I'm thinking back to like the tampon gate conversation and
Camilla
she's sort
Gay. We do not call it tampon gay. That grosses me out so much. Ew, 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 ew. Gross.
she sort of gives off this like cool as a cucumber attitude. Like she
Mhm.
doesn't, I don't get the feeling that I mean, she's entertained by Charles, right? Like she enjoys talking to him, but I don't really feel like she's enamored with him like he is with her, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and it just makes me wonder, like, is that the attitude she had with him in real life? And is
And
that
that's
why
probably
maybe
why
he was
he was
even
so,
more
yeah, well, that's
obsessed?
probably why he was so in love with her, is that she
Maybe.
was a little bit aloof. The actress is Olivia Williams, by the way. I was actually right for once. So, yeah, I mean, I thought that, like, I don't know, it's so weird that that phone call. Oh, that, like, if you've ever read the transcript of that phone call, it's just real awkward, really weird. But it's like watching two awkward teenagers fall in love and be in love, except they're like in their 40s and their 50s. And so it's, and like then the whole like can you imagine Andrew, like this? I don't know. This cannot be real, but like Andrew Parker Bowles answering the phone, handing, like knowing it's the future king of England, his handing the phone to his wife, and then her going off to the other room to have more or less mild phone sex with him.
Well,
And like it's just so, the whole thing is just so awkward. And the most awkward part is that a lot of it's true. I mean, I don't know about Andrew Parker Bowles answering the phone and how it all went down, but just wild, absolutely wild.
yeah, I was gonna say on that point. I mean, look, Camilla might not have been a royal at that point in time, but she was not like, you know, she was very well off either way. She came from a wealthy family. I would imagine they had someone answering the phone at their house don't
I
you
don't
think?
know. Who knows? But like,
I feel
I
like Andrew Parker Bowles was not picking up the phone and chatting with Charles and handing the
talk
phone to
about, yeah,
Charles.
talk
I
about
just
emasculating Andrew Parker Bowles. It's like, sure, sure, Prince of Wales. Let me hand the phone over to my wife, who's, oh gosh, it's
I
just,
have a hard time believing that, but
oh
who
yeah,
knows?
yeah. That's again dramatic license. But the show wraps up. We're just again hitting the high points here. Otherwise, like literally the Crown's official podcast has like 10 hours worth of content on this if you want the really deep dive. But episode 10 is so this is a real storyline. So Dodi Al Fayed was engaged when he met Diana and went on this like summer of love with her in 1997. And his fiance, her name is Kelly something, Kelly Price, I think, actually sued Dodi over this. And then, but of course, then Dodi passed away, and so the lawsuit was dropped. But Dodi, so now in episode 10, we see Dodi and Diana's storylines intersect. Summer of 1997 as this season closes. So seasons, by the way, I want to say one thing about episode 10. I thought it was so funny in the beginning of this episode where she just keeps hitting like, do you support the monarchy? No, no, no. I thought that was hilarious. But season 6 is going to be the show's final season. It will obviously pick up in the tragic summer of 1997 and Diana's death. So honestly, throughout the entirety of season 5, I was bracing myself for Diana's death the entire season because they never said it wasn't going to happen. They did say that they would not show the actual accident. So I was thinking that she was going to pass away this season. It never happened, spoiler alert. But what do you think about where the show left off?
Well, I was expecting that as well, but I think they left it at a very intentional place where viewers will feel like they need to see season 6. I think if they had included that, you know, if they had included her death in season 5, I think there would have been like maybe like a sense of closure with this whole series. And people may not have been compelled to tune into another season, but I think they planned that so people will want to see how they bring this story to yes, to completion up until 2002, if that's when they're going to end up
Mm-hmm.
closing out the series as a whole. But
Mm-hmm.
I think they're trying to leave off every season sort of in the middle of of a narrative or an era to flow into the next one. I don't know.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Well, before I go any further, I want to correct. This is when, so we really tried to make this episode more off the cuff and less research, just more like our actual thoughts as just casual viewers rather than royal commentators. It's Kelly Fisher, not Kelly Price. Kelly, I believe Kelly Price is a singer, but Kelly Fisher was the fiance's name, and yeah, I mean, again, I was like bracing myself every episode, like, is this the episode? Is this the episode? But yeah, I think that if I was a betting woman, season 6 will obviously spend ample time in the summer of 1997, the accident, the funeral. Then, we know for sure because they've cast a Kate Middleton that they are going to go into at least 2001, which is where Kate and William met. Now, they did not start dating, I think, until 2002 or 2003. So, we will see that. And I obviously will see Princess Margaret die. Right after that, the Queen Mother die. Oh my gosh, what is it? I'm thinking the Platinum Jubilee, but the Golden Jubilee, I think, in 2002. And then who knows how far they'll take it. Like maybe they'll take it to Charles and Camilla's wedding in 2005. I don't know. But I'm definitely ready for season 6 already, and we're gonna have to wait at least a year for that. So at minimum. So I know they're filming season 6, so that's a good sign. So I cannot wait to the actor, by the way, who's playing Prince William in season 6 is his twin. So it's a new actor. So just a lot to look forward to, and it will be the last season of the show. So I want to close with a side note that there was actually drama from the 90s. That was such a dramatic decade for the family that there was some drama that this season left out. So, as I said, we have a lot of airtime of Charles and Camilla's affair, but Diana had her own affairs. We mentioned a couple of them: James Hewitt, Barry Manicky, James Gilby, just as Charles and Diana each had their own television bombshell interview, Charles with Jonathan Dimbleby, Diana with Martin Bashir. Charles had his phone call, Camilla Gate. Diana actually had her own inappropriate phone call, if you will call it that. And that is called the Squidgy Gate phone call. And it's called that because James Gilby, who she's talking to, called her Squidgy, which is an interesting pet name. Another story from the 90s that didn't make it into season 5, William got, I think it was in 1991, got hit in the head while he was at boarding school with a golf club. It caused him a severe head injury. Now he has a lightning bolt, Harry Potter-esque scar on his forehead from this, that required him to have a 2-day hospital stay, actually. This was a big controversy at the time because Diana stayed at a private room in the hospital. She never left William's side. And meanwhile, Charles drew negative press, including the headline, "What kind of dad are you?" after he only stayed at the hospital for 42 minutes. Yikes. Also, season 5 did not talk about the Taj Mahal moment that Diana had, that famous Taj Mahal photo of her sitting in front of a monument to love and her being at the end of her marriage. The infamous last tour that Charles and Diana went on to South Korea, where it was so bad that within weeks their marriage officially was over. Didn't go over the early 1997 photo of Diana, that iconic photo of her walking through the minefield in Angola. So, I mean, there was just so much going on in the 90s that 1991 to 1997. So just those 6 years covered 10 full episodes, and we couldn't even fit it all in. So overall, love this show so much. And I hope, listeners, you enjoyed our little kind of breeze through of season 5. So any final thoughts before we wrap?
Yeah, listeners, if you have any takeaways from the show, if there's anything that we missed here, or if you want to go into a little bit more detail than what we talked about, send us an email, or you can DM us on Instagram and let us know your thoughts, and maybe we'll share some in a future episode.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, listeners, for joining us for our special episode on season 5 of The Crown, and we eagerly anticipate season 6. Bye.
Bye.